Okay, I've got just the great pleasure of introducing Teshin. Teshin Sensei, is that correct? Teshin? Yeah, okay. He's a fantastic teacher, Teshin. He's actually some of you may remember meeting him in Mountain Cloud. He came, I'm thinking twice. Did he come twice or just once?
Just once, back in 2018.
Yeah. 2018 for one of our 6-day sessions, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
And what a beautiful center you're speaking from. This is in North Carolina. Teshin is the Roshi at North Carolina Zen Center, and he's very, very sort of close, Zen family style. I mean, he's trained at Rochester Zen Center for maybe residential for something like 15 years, I think, right? Or quite a long stretch of time, or semi-resident, part of that time, residential, and also some training with, that would have been with Bodin Roshi, I guess, and then also with, I've just forgotten his name.
Well, with Lawson Sector and Sunya Kohid. So both now in North Carolina, over in the Asheville area. Yeah, so
right. Yeah. Also sort of offshoots of Rochester Zen Center.
Right. Yeah.
And as many of you know, but maybe you don't all know, the Mountain Cloud Zen Center was founded by Philip Kapler, who also founded the Rochester Zen Center. Moved out to Santa Fe for some years and got the center rolling, and then went back to Rochester. So and I've had the great pleasure of meeting with Teshin in a little group of Zen teachers that was meeting for every monthly for the last couple of years. Small group. It was very, very nice, and we've also done some thrilling sort of koan work together, which has been just great. And so it's a delight that you've but I've never actually heard a Dharma, a Zen, a Teisho from Teshin. So that's an absolute delight. Thank you so much for agreeing to come, Teshin.
Well, thank you, Henry. And also thank you to Valerie. I know who's not here tonight, but thank you for the invitation to give a talk. And so good to see so many people. I think I see 59 people in the zendo. Wow. And here behind it, you can't see because I don't have a camera facing this direction. We have a number of our Sangha here in person. So it's going to be a little bit of a juggling act to talk with both audiences. So we'll see how it goes. But again,
that's so nice to hear. Are they you couldn't just swivel it around and show us, or is that too complicated?
Well, if anybody wants to come and say hello, maybe it's because I'm a little worried about messing with the technology.
Yeah, don't mess with the tech.
Once it's set, you don't want to.
Oh, nice to meet you. Nice to see you guys. Great. Oh, lovely. More and more. Wow, great. Thank you. I should have just added, actually, I'm sorry, that Teshin also is a father of a new adopted daughter, and also is a very, really experienced psychotherapist as well. That's part of his work. Okay.
Okay, thanks. I think so before we begin, I think at least I'm sure everybody is well aware of the unfolding situation in the Ukraine and what's happening there. So maybe we just pause for a moment and bring the people of the Ukraine and of course Russia to mind. This unfolding invasion. Of course, it reminds me so much of one of the versions of our 4 Bodhisattva vows that I hear. We do a different version, but in this version, greed, hatred, and delusion arise endlessly. And of course, our vow is to put an end to those. That is the human condition, isn't it? Of course, we have this other side, but this endless greed, these three poisons: greed, hatred, delusion. And I think I don't know about other people, but in just tuning into the news today, it can be so overwhelming. The being on this side of the globe, just not much we can do. And so many times, with so much news coming our way in this era of technology, we can often feel that kind of helplessness, can't we? Like there's just nothing we can do. So I think our practice just allows us this, it gives us this capacity to hold these things, to not run from them, not to deny, of course, not to run, not to get overwhelmed either, to be able to have this capacity inside of ourselves to hold this. Last night, I picked up this book, which you may have heard of. We used it for a book study group a couple of years ago by one of Sambo Zen's teachers, David Loy. It's called Money, Sex, War, Karma. I don't know if you haven't read it, it's quite good. And he has this chapter on war. And he reminds us that the basic spiritual problem is that we have this sense of lack. And he posits that war really arises collectively from this, it's a kind of a collective response to this sense of lack. And so our practice, I would say, is to a great degree seeing through this basic sense of lack. That's so much of what our practice is about. So I thought we would take up a koan tonight. A little bit of a strange koan. Well, I would only say that most koans are quite strange, but this one's a little bit on the stranger side. It's from the Gateless Gate, the Mulan Khan, the Gateless Barrier, and this is, I believe it's case number 12. I didn't write down the number, but it's Zuigan calls master. So I'll read the case and then we'll get into it. So the case goes like this. Every day, Zuigan used to call to himself, "Oh, master." And he himself would answer, "Yes." Be awake, he would exclaim. And then he would answer, "Yes, yes." Don't be deceived by others any day, any time. And then he would respond, "No, I won't." End of koan. Okay. The reason this koan came to mind was maybe a week ago or so. I was having a conversation with a Sangha member here, and we were talking about, kind of half jokingly, but in another way, not joking at all, about this need of ours to maybe develop a little support group around our use of technology. I mean, how many of us are tethered to our phones, and how much time we spend on social media and all that. And we were talking for a few minutes, and then this documentary, which I'm sure many of you have seen, it's maybe a year and a half old or something like that, The Social Dilemma. And people have seen that. Very, very good documentary if you haven't seen it, but that came up in our conversation. It's all about how our attention, of course, is being bought and sold, how our attention is the new commodity, right? And as someone said in the documentary, I forget who it was, there's a quote in the documentary, says, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product, which I thought was so true. And in a way, I think this is why we are entering a kind of, I would say, kind of a new phase of new era of Buddhist practice, where more and more this practice is really about guarding our attention, about really being careful about where we put our attention. I read that the average person checks their phone about 80 times per day. And we spend an average of 2 hours on our phones every day. 2 hours. I'm guilty, guilty as charged. And so in each one of those apps are designed to grab our attention. They are very carefully designed. So it makes you wonder who the master of our attention really is, doesn't it? I see this in myself. I see this in students. I see this with the clients I work with. Of course, the rise in ADD, attention deficit disorder. I see this with, more and more people just reporting, feeling disconnected, despite the promise of technology. Of course, we had this bombshell report, these leaks that came out of Facebook earlier, maybe it was towards the end of 2021, about their research into Instagram and how that has really had a huge impact on young women's, young girls' mental health, self-image. When thinking about this, the words of Jose Ortega y Gasset came to mind. He said, "Tell me what you pay attention to, and I'll tell you who you are." And I'm finding that the new people that come to the Zen Center here, there's a tendency to, to want to jump from practice to practice to practice, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, kind of like a smorgasbord of practice. And I often wonder if maybe these short clips, these videos that we're so used to, TikTok and all these new apps that we just scroll through, I wonder if that's having a real impact on the way we view practice, kind of this little bit of this, a little bit of that, as I said. And I can sometimes sense this disappointment when people come for the first time to Zen workshops. Say we have these introduction to Zen workshops. When I talk about the options for practice, and of course in Zen we don't have a whole lot in terms of guided meditations. We don't have a lot of visualizations and this sort of thing. And you can see sort of like this face is sinking as as it's just, oh, the breath, right? Oh God, just that boring breath, It reminds me of this old story from Zen. I think it was Master Ichu, and a Zen student came to Master Ichu and asked a little bit about Zen, if he could say something about Zen, write something out of great wisdom. And so Ichu took his calligraphy brush and he wrote the character for attention. Maybe it should be like this, attention. And then the student said, yeah, okay, that's fine, but come on, like what else is there, right? And so Ichu took up his brush again and wrote 2 times running, attention, attention. The student apparently became a little irritated at that, and said, come on, there's got to be something more profound, more subtle. And so Ichi took up his brush again and wrote 3 times running, attention, attention, attention. And in that, in the student's frustration, right, he says, oh, well, fine, well, what does this attention mean anyway? And Ichi said, attention means attention. Attention means attention. You know, that student says, I want something profound, of course, but it's difficult to see what is profound in something so simple, isn't it? I think this is something very difficult unless we've been able to cultivate this attention, which could mean care. Doesn't, you know, it's not just a mindful attention, but just care. And so, you know, here we are online. Arguably, this, I think, said something, Henry's talked about this great democratizing of practice that's now happening online. Could be the largest change in the Dharma since the time of the Buddha, I would say. And hundreds of retreats being offered and Dharma talks and, you know, groups like this and cross-pollination between sanghas and all this good stuff. And so more people are able to access teachers like Valerie and Henry. And so it's such a beautiful thing. And yet it has its dangers, I would say, right? If we're not careful, we could really end up working against this Dharma, so to speak, which is, of course, to feel more alive, more connected. Many people, I'm finding anyway, I don't know if other people find this or are doing this, but many people are devouring Dharma talks, you know, on their lunch hour or as they run errands or this kind of thing. And it can easily slip into this kind of Zen entertainment, couldn't it, if we're not careful. And what that does is it creates a kind of a passive relationship with our practice, with Zen, with Dharma. And so just as a reminder that practice is not passive, right? We are active participants in this practice. So just maybe some encouragement, if you're able. Of course, many people aren't, and this is one of the beauties of having online access. But if you're able to connect with a Sangha, a community in person, in addition to this online Dharma, if it's possible for you to connect with a teacher, even online Doksan or some kind of interaction, because it is that really brings up this energy, this aliveness. It sort of activates our systems. And if you're able to, I would also recommend that when you're listening to talks, Dharma talks, to be careful about that multitasking, right? Because listening to Teisho or Dharma talk, you know, we are asked to give our whole attention to it, our whole being to it. And I found that this is really one of the key tools that we're developing in practice, is this ability to pay attention, not just to what we're doing, but what's actually happening inside of us, right? What's going on in our emotions, in our thoughts, being able to watch that flow of thoughts as they come and go, you know, this ever kind of changing landscape that is never the same, these body states that come and go, and learning to open up this space that we all have the ability to do. They open up this space so that we can slow things down and choose our responses rather than react habitually, which is what most of us do. Of course, this old, very famous quote comes to mind by Viktor Frankl, the psychotherapist and psychiatrist who I forget the name of his type of therapy, but is it logotherapy? I forget. But he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He had experience in the concentration camps in Germany. But he said, between the stimulus, in other words, what happens to us, and our response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I have found that the more I practice and the more my students practice, the more that space grows. You know, it can be such a relief when that space opens up. To that space, that distance, that ability to get some healthy distance from all of those thoughts, those habitual thoughts that we are so often tugged around by, rehearsing, future conversations and spending time regretting and rehashing old conversations. And it's very common when people come to sitting for the first time or after, even after some time of practicing, to have this thought that their minds are actually busier. I can't tell you how many times in Doksan I've heard that. Somebody comes in and say, I feel like ever since I started practicing Zazen, that my mind is just more busy. And of course, that's not what's happening, but we're beginning to pay attention to all of the thoughts that have always been there, that we haven't been aware of, right? All that content. And so it's such a relief to get some distance from that. And this is the basis of suffering, isn't it? In Buddhist terms anyway. So being caught by our thoughts. So finding that space is so important. And before I move on from that, just something about thoughts in general. It's not that thoughts are our enemy. This is one thing that we can easily slip into, is believing that thoughts are our problem. And I find that this is not really the case. It's not that, thoughts are just like, the brain is just like any other organ, and its job, so to speak, is to produce thoughts, just like a gland. It's just squirting out thoughts. As a psychiatrist friend of mine used to say, there's a lot going on up there in the squish. And our job is not to stop that, right? But it is to see that they just come and go, as it says in the Xi Ming, the affirming faith and mind chant that at least we do here, that these are flowers of air, just no substance to them. The words of the great Tang era master Joshu or Chao Cho come to mind. He said, "You are used by the 24 hours, but I use the 24 hours." So who is the master? Who is the master? Coming back to that case today. So aside from this basic and most fundamental, important topic of attention, what's going on with this koan? Every day, Zuigan saying, "Oh, master," and calling to himself. It's kind of a strange thing, isn't it? Here's this guy talking to himself, right? It's kind of a strange thing. It reminded me when Henry mentioned that many years ago, I lived at the Rochester Zen Center in residence, and you don't get to choose who you live with. It's one of the positives and negatives of residential training is you just don't get to choose. So, but there was this woman, and she would often talk to herself. I remember countless times coming into the staff kitchen after hours, and there she was making her dinner, kind of mumbling along, you know. And I went, you know, as a young guy, I went, you know, like, oh shit, you know, let me I just close the door and walk away, right? And I thought, what a strange person. But of course, she wasn't strange. It was my reactions that was the problem, right? She was free. She was nice and happy. Yeah. So it's kind of a freedom in being able to talk out loud. You know, you see this in kids. Kids do this when they play. I don't know if you have noticed this, but they kind of often narrate what they do out loud at a certain age. You know, I see this with our newly fostered, a to-be adopted daughter, that she'll just kind of narrate what she's doing out loud. And there was this psychologist, I think it was probably back in the turn of the century or so, and he studied this phenomenon. He posited that kids actually don't think. Very young children, very young pre-verbal children don't really think in the same way that adults do, because of course thoughts are based in language. I mean, for the most part, we have images, of course, but for the most part, thoughts are kind of an internal monologue or dialogue that we're having. And to this psychologist, I think it was Vygotsky, he thought that the way we learn to think is through interacting with our caregivers, our parents. You know, you can just see it. You know, little Johnny's playing there with mom, and mom says, "Hey, Johnny, you know, why don't you take the little block and put it in the right hole?" And Johnny says, "Okay, well, where does it go?" And she says, "Well, why don't you see where it seems to fit?" And he tries and it doesn't work. And she says, "Well, why don't you turn it?" And he says, "Over here." And so what they're doing is they are thinking out loud together. And then as the children grow, they begin to do that themselves. They begin to continue this kind of dialoguing out loud by themselves. Psychologists call this private speech. Private speech. And then, you know, what happens is we go to school. You know, little kids go to school, and they are told by the teacher or by their parents, you know, you can't keep talking out loud. So we begin to kind of go quiet with it, right? We internalize it. So this was this psychologist's theory, and you know, who knows if it's true? I don't know. It makes sense. It makes some sense to me. It reminded me. I used to be an art teacher many years ago. I was an art teacher for elementary school kids, and I would see this phenomenon. So let's say first grade, kindergarten, first grade, kids, I've said this in the Zendo before, kids can draw anything. You know, you say, "Hey, draw me a cat." And here, Mr. Sweger, here's the cat. And they're just so proud of it, you know. It's just so beautiful. And then something happens, you know. I just noticed this thing that would happen. Maybe you break for summer, the kids come back, second grade, maybe third grade, and suddenly you ask them the same question: "Draw me a cat, draw me a tree," you know. And "Oh, I don't know how. I don't know how to do it." It's like, what shifted? Right? There's this shift that happens. We become very self-conscious. This is the beginning of this heavy, weighted kind of self-consciousness that kind of begins to assert itself as the self becomes more solid. So each koan, and this koan itself, is trying to speak to this. I was going to say this part of us, but really it's not a part of us. It's, as Master Rinzai said, this true person of no rank, this face before our parents were born, as we have this saying in Zen. It's always there, and it's underneath this conditioning. This is really what Zen is trying to uncover, is this original face. And in Zen, we often talk about becoming more childlike, more free. So what was Zuigan's state of mind when he called out, "Oh, Master"? Apparently, he would do this before Teisho or Dharma talk. And Teisho is an interesting word because Teisho in Japanese means, I think, something like presenting the shout. Traditionally, it's done, at least in the Zendo, the way it's done in Rochester was that the teacher would face the altar, would face the Buddha, and it was a presentation of a teacher's understanding directly to the Buddha. Oh, Master, yes, be awake. Yes, yes. Don't be deceived by others. Any day, any time. No, I will not. There's a call and a response there. And this practice is really about this call and response. We see this throughout the koans, don't we? For anybody who's familiar with the koan practice, we see this in the Muman koan. There's so many examples of this. The national teacher calls his attendant 3 times, and the 3 times the attendant answers. You see this with Mahakashapa calling to Ananda. Ananda, yes, sir. I think, I don't know how long ago, it wasn't too long ago, Henry, that you gave a Teisho a talk on this case in the Muman Kan with Seize and Master Sozan. Seize, of course, comes to Sozan and says, "I'm poor and alone. I beg you, Master, to please make me rich." And Sozan says, "Venerable Seize." And Seize replies, "Yes, Master." So you see this call and response. Venerable Seize. That alone could suffice as a koan. Venerable Seize. Yes, Master. Yes, Master could suffice. Just yes. Sometimes it's not even using any words. It's just like Master Gute. Every time he was asked about Zen, he would just hold up a finger. That's it. So this monk, a monk or a student asks and gets a response. And so we have this element of questioning in Zen, which of course arises from this sense of wonder, this sense of curiosity, sometimes this deep longing to understand ourselves, what this world is about. We can feel it, for many people that come to Zen practice, they have this deep wonderment or questioning that embeds itself in their muscle tissues. And really, this is what we breathe into Mu as we practice. We infuse this need to know into this Mu. This non-verbalized questioning, if we have it. It reminds me of a story about I don't know where it came from. Maybe somebody could shed some light on it, but it was passed down through the Rochester lineage. maybe I read it somewhere though, about a Christian who came to see a Zen teacher, and the Zen master questioned this Christian and said, "What did Jesus say when he was on the cross?" And the Christian replied something like, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And the Zen teacher shot back and said, "No, he didn't say that. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Just like, this totally giving himself, totally gone, forsaken, totally forgotten, forsaken. Just like poor Seize, all alone, all one. So, my God, oh Master, same calling. And at that moment, that call is a no call. There is no call. And that answer, there is no answer. It's only when we give ourselves completely to that calling and responding that any kind of response actually can come. Actually, the truth is that response is always there. It is simply that we are tuning into it. This world is always presenting itself to us. We are just tuning into it. So I was sitting with this koan earlier this week, and I came back to the house from the zendo. This here people will know it's February, but the daffodils, they're already out, and I was walking back totally engrossed in this koan, and just these daffodils just boom, just yes. It was just, that was Zuigan's, oh Master, right there. Total affirmation, total affirmation. But then he continues, Zuigan continues. He says, don't be deceived by others. No, I won't. And but so we have to ask, like, why would this great master continue with this? That's a good question. Of course, every teacher needs to continue to deepen their training, to their understanding. And this is true for experienced practitioners. It's so easy to fall into a kind of complacency with practice. But there's always more to experience, to go deeper. And so I just think of this part of the koan as Zuigan doing doksan with himself, just totally there. So we can see that, Zen is about awareness, about attention, but it's not just a kind of mindful attention. It is about seeing that how much this world is giving to us, how it's always calling out to us and answering us. As Henry's been talking, using this term original love, it's always calling out. It's not a sentimental love, right? It's not that. Zuigan says, don't be deceived by others. I think you could easily just say, don't be deceived by the other, the concept of an other, right? Don't get drawn into othering, which of course is the basis of war. So I know we're running long here, so just to finish up, in Mumon's commentary for this case, he would always add a little commentary in a verse. And in his commentary for this koan, he says, old Zuigan himself sells and himself buys. he brings forth a lot of masks and goblins and plays with them. A calling one, an answering one, an awake one, and one who won't be deceived by others. If you take these different appearances as really existing, you're altogether mistaken. And then he says, if you imitate Zuigan, your understanding is that of a fox. You know, Muman mentions all these masks, all these goblins and demons, a calling one, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure for all of us, that's just the beginning of the list. You know, all these parts of ourselves, all these voices, all the roles we play, all the all the masks we put on, all the facades we wear to fool ourselves, to fool other people, right? All vying for attention. Sometimes when we sit zazen, it can feel like, because we are quieting, it's like it's an invitation suddenly for all these actors, all these demons and goblins to make their appearance, to come front and center on the stage. Doesn't it feel like that sometimes, you know? But over time, we can begin to realize how much of our attention really goes into those internal dialogues, all those voices. As a therapist, I often work very directly with people on these things. And it can be quite liberating for people when they begin to see how much of their sense of self really is made up of what we call these defenses, all these parts of ourselves that are vying for attention, these defensive patterns. And eventually, through faithfully returning to the present moment over and over again, they just begin to lose their power, and they just don't have much. They just become less important or less interesting. I find. I think they just become, they're just not as compelling anymore. These internal, how much time we spend in there. And then people report feeling more authentic, more fluid, more responsive. Our existence becomes more like a mirror, right? Just reflecting more and more just what's in front of us. And we get a taste of what Zuigan is calling out to. So I'm going to end in just a second or two. I started talking about attention and how all of these apps are vying for our attention. But perhaps the greatest force that is pulling at our attention is this strong sense of me, all these voices inside of us that are vying for our attention. It's many magnitudes more powerful than any app, isn't it? It's the self app, right? The self app that is so strong. But the more we sit, and this is where I want to end, the more we sit, the more we find that the world is much more intriguing than that self app, So thank you, Zuigan, for your teaching, and Master Mulan as well. So that's all I've got tonight. It's a little late here. My voice is getting tired. It's been a long day of sessions here. So we're 2 hours ahead of you guys out in Santa Fe. So thank you for listening tonight.
Teshin, thank you so much. Very, very wonderful, beautiful talk. Very deep, actually. Very beautiful. Very grateful to you for sharing and making it very alive and very sort of real for us. It is an odd koan, I agree. And but you really, in fact, it's the next one I would be talking about. I've been slowly going through the Gateless Gate. and you've done it for me, so I will skip it. You've done a much better talk than I would have given. I don't know. I mean, I know it's late and everything. Should we? But I think we could have just 5 minutes if anybody wants to ask. If you're open to that, Teshin, if somebody wanted to ask something of you, would you? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sure, I'm game.
I think not for long, but okay. We got Ben. You wanna?
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to the very beginning of your talk, which really hit home with me. I would very much like to have a Sangha in person. I did prior to the pandemic. But my question is, do you think that Buddhism in general in the US has a supply and demand problem? It seems that if you don't live in a major metropolitan area, you really have to travel to have Sangha unless you do something like this. Do you see an end to that problem? Do you think there will be enough teachers at some point that the teachers will come to us instead of us having to come to the teachers?
Well, that's a good question. I really don't know. I mean, in our that's one of the fortunate things and unfortunate things, I would say, in our lineage, at least in our particular strain of Zen, and I would say this is probably true for Henry and Sambo Zen, is it just takes a long time to become a teacher. And it takes a lot of dedication and just butts on cushions for just many, many years. So it's not easy it's not like, just getting a certificate online or something, or going to college. It's but we do have this sort of middle ground. I mean, there's obviously a lot of groups or a lot of teachers that can offer basic support. But in our lineage with koans, we want somebody that has trained in the koans. If that's our particular thing, we want to find somebody that has that background. So yeah, I hope more and more. My hope is that more and more people will want to practice and take on the Dharma enough to become teachers eventually, and so that we can meet people more where they are at, and more and more communities. There are lots of Zen communities. There often, you just have to dig a little deeper, sometimes just sitting groups. So if you can't find a teacher, at least see maybe even just friends to sit with, or a group of like-minded people, and then connect with a teacher online if you're not able to find one in person. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sort of thinking, if there isn't another question immediately coming up, maybe we should just let Teshin go and have a good rest after a long, hard day. And it's already coming up on 8 p.m. And you've given us so much, Teshin. It's really very beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you all. And again, gratitude towards you, Henry, and Mountain Cloud Zen Center. I hope to be out there in person again not before too long.
Well, we'd love to have you offer a talk when you can come.
Well, we'll see. Thank you for the invitation.